when we observe the world economy, we see that there is a different economic growth and development in different parts of the world, in different countries. And the political correctness suggests that we're supposed to say that the more democracy we have in the country, there is a more robust economic growth. But it is not the case. They are the examples where democracy, liberal democracy, we have different types of democracies, are supporting economic growth, but we have also the cases where democratic procedures are making economic expansion more difficult. One may see this problem through the prism of efficiency of decision-making process. So if we compare, for instance, China, which is not democracy, it's an authoritarian system, but the decisions are being taken fast, in a accountable way, reasonable, and I would say most of the time it's a rational economic policy, but a non-democratic one. And now if you will take, for instance, United States, especially under Trump presidency, it's hardly rational. I would say it is simply stupid what Trump does, what Trump economics implies, etc. So one may say, okay, authoritarian regime is better for economic expansion than democratic one. It is not true, because authoritarian regime does work in China, but does not work, for instance, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, in Congo, in some other countries. So it depends on very many factors. And the political regime, the political system, the political institutions, political culture is very important for economic performance, for economic growth, for social and economic development, but it is not the leading or decisive factor. Also important are institutions, that is the rules of the game, the regulation. Also very important is the culture. So the case of China, which I called Chinism, it's neither capitalism or socialism. It is different animal, it's a different system, it's a very unique one. Chinism is an authoritarian political regime, but it's meritocracy. This is an authoritarian regime, but the people which are in charge are professionals, they are technocrats. I cannot say that, for instance, about American current administration. For instance, the lead negotiator of the trade negotiations between China and US, Mr. Lighthizer, he is a lawyer, but he is an ignorant in economic matters. And what Americans are insisting for is hardly rational from an economic perspective, because if they want to get rid of too big a fiscal deficit, too big a trade deficit, they have to raise domestic savings, not attack China, because the current account and trade balance is a multilateral, not a bilateral problem. So it depends. Political correctness says democracy is good for everything. Well, democracy is value per se, and for that reason I'm very much in favor of democracy regime, of democratic system, of liberal democracy. But if it is supported by proper leadership, to be successful, that's also my experience from Poland. I was 4 times Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, but basically I'm Professor of Economics, is that to be successful, first, one has to have the vision, not an illusion. And vision is something complex, dynamic, and long-lasting. Secondly, one has to base development strategy on a proper economic theory. It's supposed to be not only knowledge-based economy, it's supposed to be also knowledge-based policy and politics. And third, we have to have a good leadership. So the question is, what kind of leadership we have? We have better leadership with all the problems in France than in Italy. I would say that we have better leadership with all the reservations in Germany than, say, in Spain. I would say, I believe so, that we have better leadership in Mexico than in Brazil. And definitely we have better leadership in China than in the United States. So it very much depends on vision, professionalism and leadership, which may be good within the given ideological and political system.
Right, but all the political systems these days, they confront various economic problems, and how do you see the major challenges for the global economy in the near future? I mean, not in the long run, 25 years, but in the immediate future, and specifically for Europe and maybe Eastern Europe.
Well, you say not in the long run because the biggest challenge, which is the long run, is the climate change. No doubt about that. But that's a problem which is the long-term problem, and it must be addressed gradually, but in the long term. But if we are talking about, say, 1, 2, 3 years, or even 3, 5, 10 years, we can survive the climate change, but we cannot survive it for 1, 2, 3 generations. And to be responsible and accountable and successful, we have to act now, year after year, country after country, and so on. But going back to basic economics, it's a question of rebalancing the world economy. My train of thought says me that globalization is an irreversible process. Even if Mr. Trump does not understand it, and even if he dislikes it, even if the current American administration, not only the American, but mostly American, and they're very important, because if you have new nationalism in some small country somewhere, we don't care. But US is still the leading economy in the world. So with this unilateralism, this nationalism, this protectionism, this likeness of trade war, they are contributing to more problems. Intentionally, Trumponomics is aiming for solving the problems of imbalance, but they will make more problems because this is multilateral problem because of globalization. So what is globalization? In economic sense, because there is also cultural, political, security, environment, and some aspects of globalization. Globalization is a historical and spontaneous process of liberalization and integration of that sort to the extent separately performing national economies into one interconnected, intertwined, interrelated worldwide economy, global economy. What happens here can be Indonesia or Russia. Depends upon what is happening elsewhere. Elsewhere can be Canada or Australia, and it's making some influence still elsewhere, and this can be Nigeria or Argentina. We are connected, because of supply chain. Even simple products, like say, well, I don't know, maybe my ball pen, okay? Well, it is written made in Switzerland, but I think that there are components which are brought piece by piece from maybe even 10 countries because of the global supply chain. So now China is moving up, what makes Americans nervous, etc. But we are interconnected. So the question in the medium and short run is rebalancing of the world economy, because some countries, they have too much of savings, and some others, they have not enough of savings. There is the surplus of savings, say, first of all, again, in China, but also in Japan, in Germany. And there is lack of savings in, say, US, first of all, but also in France, or for instance, if you wish, in Poland. So therefore we are importing capital, and somebody say exporting the capital. But the problem of economic imbalance, trade, current account, is a very big challenge for the ongoing globalization. And one way to attack is Mr. Trump way, which is irrational, which in the longer run will be also harmful for American economy. They signed only yesterday, in mid of January, the so-called phase one between US and China, an agreement. But China has accepted it because it is just giving more time to calm the situation down. My reading of China's approach is that they decided a political leadership, which is constant. They don't change it in democratic way like they do in US, and they don't change it like they do in Russia. That, in the morning Mr. Medvedev was prime minister, and in the afternoon somebody else was the prime minister, well, in waiting, but he will be accepted, or he's accepted already by Duma and so on. So this is neither authoritarian regime, nor is the liberal democracy. It's also something in between, because we have a spectrum of political systems and we have a spectrum of economic regimes. So therefore, in the short run, I would say on the flow of capital, including speculative short-term capital, and an effort to regulate the financial flows all over the world on the global scale by the International Monetary Fund or within some coordination, governance within G20, of which the partners are not only the biggest Western richest economies, but also India, China, Brazil, Mexico, Russia, Indonesia, and so on. It's very difficult, but it is possible. You know, I'm not an optimist, I'm just a pragmatic rationalist, but I know that each and every of this problem, they have the solution. From a theoretical viewpoint, we do know, well, we still argue. I mean, we the researchers, we the men of science, social sciences, economics, finance, etc., about the details, about the particularities, but we are not doomed for, you know, another great crisis or whatsoever if there is a proper effort to govern. Because in our lifetime, as the result of the historical process of globalization, the global economy has emerged. We do have interconnected global economy, but we don't have interconnected global politics and policy. We don't have the governance mechanism. In Russia, we have the government, whatever is leading the government, but there is the government, there is Duma, there is the central bank, there is the president. Same in the US and elsewhere. Even in the European Union, we have the new European Union Commission, new parliament. That is the mechanism of governance, of coordinating economic policies. And in the interconnected world economy, we don't have such a mechanism. So it's a very long shot. I can't see a good solution to the short-term problems, like trade imbalances, currency volatility, flight of capital, about what you are asking, without longer approach, long-term view. You want to solve the problem which you are just stepping up today, tomorrow, etc. You have from time to time to take a look to the horizon or even beyond. There is not a solution. In other words, the best solution for the current problems is a long-term approach. Also for climate change and also for migration, which is linked somehow to these processes, because actually we should bring a little bit down the rate of traditional growth in the richest countries of the world to leave more ecological space, room to catch up for the developing countries, also to encourage the people to stay there. Otherwise, they will be leaving the poor countries trying to get, not only to reach West, also, for instance, from some Central Asian republics to Russia, which is a big brother and a richer country for them.
But basically, do you think there is a chance that the gap between the fast developing and not developing at all countries, will that gap grow wider or narrow in the near future?
I think,
is there a chance for the underdeveloped countries to catch up ever? Because every day they lose one extra chance.
well, catching up, but not to catch up.
Yeah.
There will be never a situation that everybody will be as rich as Switzerland or Norway or New Zealand or Canada. If we would like to have the level of consumption of US, which now has GDP per capita roughly $60,000, all over the world, in US we have 430 million people, in the world we have 7.6 billion people. If you would like to have the standard of living, or just consumption, which is a proxy to standard of living, American standard, we have to have American GDP per capita, we have to have the American productivity of labor. It's a long shot, but from theoretical viewpoint, presume that it will happen. But then we have to have resources per capita as much as they use in US to have this standard of living of $60,000. But for 7.6 billion people, with current technology, it calls for resources 3 times larger than we have on whole Earth. Simply because of natural barrier, it is impossible. It is impossible. Technological progress will contribute a little bit because the consumption, the output is less material energy using. You know, we use yet less on energy and materials resources for a unit of value of products. But now getting to your good question, you know, catching up. Yes, that's a historical process already set in motion, and for that reason, globalization is a good thing. It fuels the growth of countries lagging behind if they have the proper strategy to use globalization on their behalf. China has such, Saudi Arabia not necessarily. Russia is somewhere in between. Actually, Russia is not a good player of globalization on the behalf of expansion of Russia's economy. Poland is doing has done recently much better. So when we observe what's going on, the developing countries, I like that you said that you didn't say emerging markets. I don't like it. I'm calling these countries emancipating economies or catching up. They are liberalizing, opening up, but they have also a kind of own domestically oriented development policy. And Mexico is growing faster than US. They are catching up. Poland is growing faster than Germany. We are catching up. Estonia is growing faster than Finland. They are catching up. And so on, you know. Indonesia, say, is growing faster than Japan. They are catching up. The distance now is much smaller than it was 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. Okay, somebody says there is more of inequality in the world because of globalization. That is true, because at the same time inequality within the countries is growing. In Russia, you have too much of inequality. The Gini is over 40, same in China, same in the US. In some countries, very few, inequality was going down. Recently also in Poland, to some extent also in Brazil, before Bolsonaro became the president, or in Morocco, but there are just few examples. But that is because of inequality within the countries was increasing. But between countries, the distance between average income, say, in Hungary and Austria is now smaller than 20 years ago, or between, say, Albania and Greece, it is smaller than it was 20 years ago. And that is the positive result of global economic game, of globalization, of liberalization, of our transition in this part of the world to the market economy. But some countries are much more successful, like for instance Poland, because we did have a vision, proper economic policy based on the proper economic theory, on minor pragmatism, and I think most of the time a good leadership. I'm not talking about current situation in Poland, where there is plenty of criticism towards the current political leadership, but the economy is still performing relatively good.
You said that Russia is not performing as good as, for example, Poland in globalization process and advancing its economy. Is that because of what we started our discussion with, because of the political arrangements?
To some extent, yeah, I think, well, to some extent to the political arrangement, because Russian democracy still is somehow, I may say, limited. It's not full-fledged liberal democracy, and if there was more of exchange and competition of different options of economic policy, maybe more often than not, they will be relatively better decisions taken. But I think that the main cause of Russia's somehow lagging behind in taking advantage of the indispensable global economic game is a resource curse. Because you rely still too much, recently less, and that is one. You can put it on the successful side of the putting military policy. Well, I heard
interrupt you for a second. I remember the talk about the need to get rid of the dependence on raw materials in this country as long as I live here.
Yeah, me too.
And nothing happens.
Me too, but I heard today, for instance, from a competent Russian economist that over the last 2, 3, or maybe even 4 years, the non-energy sector was growing faster than the energy sector based on oil and gas. But definitely, the recipe for indispensable part for Russia's success in the future is diversification of the real sector. That is, diminishing the dependence on energy. And somehow, because it is easier to take the cream, or especially when there is a good price for oil and gas. And well, I don't want, we cannot talk about everything, but sometimes good news are bad news. Now we have problem not only in Venezuela, in Nigeria, but we have also problem in Libya. We have the conflict in Iran and all around Iran. That is the good news for Russia's, energy industry, because most likely the price of oil and gas will go up. We'll pay more because we do buy it, and you sell it. So that is the factor which is, not a good motivation for working hard to restructure and the economy and to diversify it. And I think that is one factor that Russia was not so much successful in engaging in this globalization game. And second, very nasty, I don't like it, that is to weaken influence of the oligarchs in Russia's economic matters and the political one. I was asked today at the Gaidar Economic Forum about my success in Poland, being considered an architect of this relative success. And I said that, well, many factors, but one of them that we were able to avoid oligarchization of the economy. And we knew since the beginning that we wanted to join the European Union. It's not an option for Russia, to join the European Union. But to diversify the economy and to engage your industries more in the world global supply chain, it's an option. It's an option, but you have to be, Russia also more sympathetic to inward foreign direct investment, also in some industries which are still relatively closed for the foreign investors. I think that is what China has managed in a perfect way, and now, because of that, China is being accused by US, first of all, that they were stealing property. No, I was telling 25 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, that China would done better than we, even in Poland, inviting foreign direct investment, but into the sectors, into the industries. They wanted it, together with technology. You want to invest in China, you're welcome. But share with us your technology and show us your managerial and marketing skills. You will get access to our market, but we'll access you to the world market because we will raise our competitiveness using also somehow the technology you will bring in. And now, Mr. Trump is saying that they were stealing, they were forcing the foreign investors. They didn't put the pistol to their head, it wasn't a blackmail, it was a business. A different one with Chinese characteristics, but that is what really contributed a lot to diversification of Chinese economic structure and enabled China to become a powerhouse in the global economy, because in some time they export capital, but not in the way you do in Russia, that property is so expensive in Cyprus, Florida, and London because Russian oligarchs are buying nice residences. China is investing in industries, including high tech, and now they export more of the capital they did the import. So again, the question how the country is involved in globalization in a successful way is a long story, but definitely Germany does it much better than Italy, Poland much better than Ukraine, US pretty good too, but without taking care of complexity. Because the answer for your question, for each of your challenging question, is complexity. But you cannot talk about complexity for a TV interview, because complexity calls, for the long lecture, or even for a book, or for a semester of teaching my students. But complexity, it is... I remember when I became Deputy Prime Minister for the first time, 25 years ago, I was very much critical of so-called shock therapy. I called it shock without therapy. Too much shocks, not enough therapy. So I came with my program called Strategy for Poland. And a fellow journalist asked me, Professor, Prime Minister, what's the difference between your strategy for Poland and shock therapy you don't like so much? But, you know, very briefly, without another lecture, because that's an interview. How long? You have 15 seconds. So I said, you know, in 15 seconds, Strategy for Poland is a medium-term development program addressing not only the issue of dynamic economic balance, but also social cohesion and ecological balance. It's based on an orthodox economic theory, and it is a very complex approach. So the biggest difference between what they've done before, confusing the ends with the means, is that I'm not confusing the ends of the means. I see the means as the instruments to the ends, and that's about complexity. And he said it was 40 seconds. So it's difficult to answer such a question, but there is at least a piece of such an answer.
Well, and to sum up our discussion, you know, when reforms were started in Russia 25 years ago or so, actually Poland was sort of an example for us at the early stage. But now, when we see the results in the two countries, would you say that Russia has failed going the path of Poland?
Well, I see this history a little bit different. I did have the privilege to know in person Grzegorz. Actually, it was an incident. We were together at Erasmus University in Rotterdam in 1991. And we were walking and talking with Grzegorz, and he got a telephone call. He didn't have at that time mobile. They were calling to the reception in our hotel. President Yeltsin was calling and asked him to join the government as the finance minister. That was before I became the finance minister. So Grzegorz was trying, not understanding to the very end, I'm afraid, to liberalize and stabilize the economy, believing wrongly, same as Balcerowicz in Poland, that liberalization and stabilization is the critical step towards market economy. When I was in Russia in 1990, after there was a program of Yavlinsky, in 500 days to market economy, I came back to Poland and I presented the seminar in 500 days towards hyperinflation. And I was right, not Yavlinsky. That was the program leading to hyperinflation, not to the market economy. Market economy is basically about institutions, rules of the game. Of course, based on the dominance of the private property. So the very tricky part of transition is a sensible privatization. But what you did wrong in the 90s, already when Gaider was gone from the government, under the Yeltsin administration, that was the denationalization, that was the privatization which was not linked with demonopolization, and unfortunately fueled the emergence of oligarchic structures which are very much engaged in politics. You know what is the difference between Russia and Ukraine? Both systems are corrupted and oligarchic. But in Ukraine, the oligarchs say to the policymakers, do what we want. And they do. And in Russia, the policymakers, starting from president, says to the oligarchs, get out of politics and do your business. It's not a good recipe. You don't need oligarchs, you know. We need sometimes a big business, but not an oligarchic one. So oligarchization of Russian economy, which occurred in the mid-90s, was the critical moment when Russia actually had started to lag behind. Our transitional recession was only 3 years, 12 quarters. Second half of 1989, 1990, 1991, and first 2 quarters of 1992. And we lost less than 20% of GDP. But that was mainly not because the policy was perfect at that time, because it was also wrong. That was the shock without therapy, neoliberal, you know, privatize as much as you can, the faster the better, be tough in fiscal monetary way, and the market will do the job. No, the market will do recession and hyperinflation. You need regulation, you need institution, you need supervision on the markets. What I combined, I think better than some of my predecessors and my successors, being in politics, it is the synergy between the power of invisible hand of market, of which I'm in favor to the extent, and the power of the visible hand of government. I see all the time too much of the power of the government in Russia and not enough power of the invisible hand of market. I don't like, that much of power of the government as I see in China or say in Saudi Arabia with all the differences. It's a tricky game because it's contextual. My new pragmatism theory, or an outline of theory, heterodox, aiming for triple balance, economic one, but also ecological one and social one, is very much stressing the problem that it's contextual for the same questions. I will answer somehow differently in Mexico or in Indonesia or in Nigeria that I am answering you in Russia. We do not need 200 economies for 200 countries, but we do not need, it's impossible to have one size fits all economy. And this early transition shock without therapy in Poland and also to some extent in Russia was this naive belief in this USA made, brought by the gurus, this orthodox from the IMF, Washington consensus, one size fits all. No, we need a contextual approach. The basic of economics is same one, but the particulars, the details, they depend on legacy, geopolitics, geoeconomics, culture, what we got from the previous system, etc. So it's very much a process of learning by doing, and somehow also because we were reformed already in 1989 towards market and democracy much more together with Hungary than anybody else, it was relatively easier for us to jump towards the transition to full-fledged market economy. And also, since the beginning, there was bold political consensus in Poland that we are going to the European Union. So we got freedom, starting from the influence of the Soviet Union, which was collapsing, but we had to target in the acquis communautaire, the regulation of the European Union, and for instance, it enforces us to implement certain reforms. The influence was from outside, this time from the European Union, but that was following our free, independent wish to join the European Union. That wasn't the case, and in Russia, there was much more hesitation. Where we go? We knew that we were leaving the Soviet Union behind, and we were going to better future. But what better future implied, till now, what you make here during the Gajdarowski Forum, it depends, there are so many views and sometimes they are quite contradictory, so we have to discuss even more because there are the solutions to these problems.
Thank you very much for your extraordinary opinions and your brilliant insights. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Really.
Спасибо.
Great.